Joining us now from Washington, senior political editor and White House correspondent for the Huffington Post, Sam Stein. Sam, this is going to get people taking a closer look at lethal injections, which some people, I think, mistakenly believe is somehow more humane. You read the accounts of this, you read the account of the way that they're, these states are now scrounging around like drug addicts trying to find the right combination of drugs to execute. Suddenly, it seems like a very shoddy, haphazard way to do things. And what happened to this guy last night, regardless of the heinous things he did in his life, amounts to, it looks like, descriptions amounts to torture, could possibly amount to torture, and is clearly unconstitutional.
Yeah, all of that is true. In fact, there are some states where they're having such trouble getting their hands on these cocktails of drugs that they're actually thinking of going back to firing squads in gas chambers. This is an article in the AP last year. But the big story here was sort of the political backdrop of this, which is that the governor of the state, Governor Fallon, had pushed the state Supreme Court to not have a stay of execution. The Supreme Court had granted a stay because the defense team for these two people, who committed heinous crimes, had said that they wanted to know what was in these drugs so they could determine whether it was cruel and unusual punishment. The court gave them a stay, and then the governor interjected and said that she could not respect the state Supreme Court's decision and that she was going to instruct officials to go ahead with the execution anyway.
I have not, over the past couple of weeks, read the Oklahoma Constitution.
Yeah.
But I don't think we study that in law school in Florida. But can a governor just decide on her own that a Supreme Court decision is null and void?
Well, it's complicated. Obviously, there's a constitutional crisis at hand. The state's Court of Appeals, I believe, had ruled that the stay shouldn't be allowed to happen. And because of a weird quirk in the Oklahoma court system, she said that the Court of Appeals had the jurisdiction over this issue and not the state Supreme Court. Either way, they were on the brink of a constitutional crisis. And then the state Supreme Court basically acquiesced and said, okay, you can go ahead with the execution. In fact, one of the state representatives in Oklahoma had threatened to bring articles of impeachment against the justices on the court for staying the execution. That's how thirsty for the execution some of these lawmakers were. Well, it turns out they did not have enough proper information about how to administer these drugs, and now only retroactively is the governor saying, yeah, we need to study what's going on here. Of course, that's too late for one of these inmates. And again, listen, these guys committed heinous crimes. They were convicted and sentenced to death, but the politics in the state had pushed so fervently for this to happen that it's coming back to bite them.
Well, the Constitution is the Constitution is the Constitution. And,
exactly.
Walter Isaacson, this is not a right-left issue as much as it was, say, 30 years ago. When you have people like Pat Robertson a decade ago starting to move against the death penalty. You have a lot of other evangelicals that have been moving that direction over the past several years. This is a case that is going to make people... Willie Geist and I were just talking on set. We're bending over backwards trying to do all these things that aren't cruel and unusual. You just kind of wonder whether Gary Gilmore had it a lot better than... that is a very old reference, going back to 77 or 78, a firing squad. Whether that's not more humane than this nonsense that's going on in Oklahoma and Florida across the country.
It does make us reflect on the Constitution. It says no cruel and unusual punishment.
Right.
That is something in the Constitution that changes over time. The definition of what's cruel and unusual is, changes.
Right.
This will start a conversation on that again, because clearly lethal injection, when the drug companies are not going to supply the drugs, you don't know where the drugs are coming from.
And by the way, that's important, Walter. That's what's causing these problems. The drug companies are now refusing to supply the drugs, and it is causing people to behave.
So when you have a group of legislators or a governor who's going hell-bent to get something done like that, and then this happens, it's also a caution sign saying this is more complicated.
We also have to note that just yesterday, or 2 days ago maybe, a study came out that showed that it's likely that 1 out of every 25 people who are executed by death penalty are probably innocent. And so we are actually executing innocent people. This is a bigger conversation that we need to have about how we treat the people who are on death row.
I wonder, Bill, if in the state of Oklahoma in the legislature they have as much intensity toward education as they do, seemingly some of them, about improving their capital punishment system.
This is I mean, first of all, I'm not a proponent of the death penalty, and I think that what this is going to do is re-energize the opposition. This was awful. I mean, I'm conflicted also because I'm thinking of the families.
Sure.
And of revenge and nothing, no penalty could be terrible. But when you look at 100 years from now, when you look back on our society, and you look at how we deal with each other, the brutality and the cruelty of punishment. And something like this to me is just it's so sad. I'm not feeling sad necessarily for the guy what he did, but just the human quality of this. And again, I wish I had an answer. I wish I knew how to deal with this.
Well, there's one thing, Mark, that's always been in the equation when people talk about capital punishment, and of course the first thing you think of is the victims and the victims' families. Right. But in state after state, the lack of true certainty of punishment. When they, in some states you get the death penalty, or you get life in jail, but life in jail means like 25 years. Right. But the certainty of punishment, life in jail means life in jail, that might do something to resolve this age-old dilemma.
Well, look, the bigger issues that Sam raised and Bill raised about the victims and about the question of the death penalty being administered fairly, all that needs to always be discussed. The governor has to solve this. Mary Fallin is a national leader. She was a member of Congress. The legislature has a role. The courts have a role. She has to, today, begin to unravel what went wrong technically, but to restore confidence in the criminal justice system, because this so undermines confidence in what is already a very tough issue for the country.
And again, I think Sam, really quickly, I mean, again, just so everybody knows, the guy that was on death row, the guy that had a heart attack last night and died, shot a 19-year-old woman and buried her alive. Again, a heinous crime. That said, it's not as if there weren't heinous crimes when our founding fathers drafted the Constitution. There is a clause that prohibits cruel and unusual punishment. And in this case, again, when you have this chaotic process where the drug manufacturers won't even give you the drugs, so you're going out and creating these cocktails, which at the end didn't put this man under last night. So according to the reports, he suffered agonizing suffocation and pain. And yes, just like the 19-year-old woman who was buried alive, we understand that there's a difference.
Sure. Yeah, I mean,
we are the United States of America, and we have a Constitution that is supposed to prohibit cruel and unusual punishment. Again, I'm not preaching against the death penalty. I'm saying, though, this is no way to administer it consistently or with the Constitution.
Yeah, listen, you can find the way this execution was botched to be utterly grotesque and not feel sympathy for the people who committed these crimes. You can find the way this was utterly grotesque and still believe in the death penalty. I don't think those two are in contradiction at all. The one other point I would add is that for fiscal conservatives out there was a study that came out, I think it was not too long ago, in Kansas, where executing people actually costs 4 times more for the state than it does to keep them in prison for life, just because of the legal appeals that constantly have to be made for any execution to take place. So it is actually cheaper to not execute someone than it is to execute someone.
All right. Thank you so much, Sam. Greatly appreciate it. Bill, appreciate you.